Welcome back to another edition of Exercise Explored. This time we're going to be exploring the overhead press. So what is an overhead press? Well, essentially it is lifting, raising, pushing an external object or load overhead. Why would we do the overhead press? What does this give us? What does this give our clients? Well, it's pretty obvious that it gives us a huge amount of upper body strength, particularly through the shoulders and the triceps. And when we talk about the shoulders, we're not just talking about the glenohumeral joint, that shoulder joint, but we're also talking about the scapula. The scapula serves to help the movement as well. So it's a great upper body exercise. And when we think about trying to then relate this to our clients' goals, to our clients' lives, if we first look at life, we often have to lift objects overhead. We take them from different positions and we reach them up overhead. We're placing objects, we're placing shopping up onto a higher shelf, we're taking something off a shelf and bringing it back down to a normal height. We utilize that type of lifting in everyday life. And if we're thinking about the sorts of clients that might really benefit from reaching, lifting and managing objects up overhead from a height or to a height, really I think about active aging is such a huge client base to be working with this, to give them the independence, to be at home on their own. You know, a lot of active aging, a lot of our aging clients, they might be on their own. And to give them that ability and that confidence to be able to lift their shopping up, take it from different heights, you know, arrange their ornaments on their shelves, it really does help them live their lives as independently and as happily as possible. Then when we look at the kind of the other end of our client spectrum, we look at athletes. We look at athletes, either professional athletes or recreational athletes. And we think about tennis serves. Tennis serves, we have to reach up overhead and then produce a huge amount of force down. We think about rugby. Rugby players will utilise the shoulders to lift in lineouts, to tackle, to scrummage, to ruck, to maul. There's a lot of shoulder contact, and to have that stability will make a huge difference. And by overhead pressing, we can help build that stability. Boxing as well, another impact sport which relies on the hands. The hands and the arms are the driver, and a lot of the power from boxing is generated in the hips and the torso, but then feeds through the shoulder complex, as we discussed before, through the scapula into the shoulder joint and then out into their weapons, being their hands. So there are lots of athletic movements, and more than that involve shoulder stability and also shoulder mobility. When we think about the shoulders, the shoulder joints, the glenohumeral joint and the scapula, we think about it needing that blend of stability and mobility in order to get and maximize our performance. So how is this done traditionally? At the moment, we've been watching a seated and some seated variations of traditional overhead pressing. We can do it seated, but we can also, and we'll be looking at some standing variations as well. It's usually incorporated when we think about the overhead press. It sounds pretty simple, but it's working vertically against gravity. So when we look at our variations today, predominantly those variations will be working against gravity in some way. So now we're looking at the standing version. We've seen all those seated variations, still keeping it pretty traditional. And here we're now starting to look at the overhead press from a standing position. We're looking at that, like we say, that blend of mobility and stability, being able to press that overhead, needs stability all the way up through the body, through the torso, in order so that we do not compensate from other positions. Now today we are going to be taking it on from these traditional movements. We're going to be breaking it out using different tools, different positions of the body and different handprints and footprints to really maximize and individualize our overhead press. And that's really what it's all about with our Exercise Explored videos, is to give you options so that no matter what the client's needs, goals, or where they are currently, you should be able to give them an overhead press movement which suits them down to the ground, which you can tweak to make easier and more applicable to them. So here we're now looking at adding a little bit of extra load, and because of the extra load you see the bumpers on the bar. So this gives us a little moment of offsetting the weight, taking the weight away from the body and then producing a lot of concentric force to get the job done and drive overhead. This is a really good power exercise, particularly for any athletes. Now we're going to start to play around with the variables. So to begin with, it's only very subtle, but you see that the bar is slightly more biased to one side. There's a little more length to the right hand side at the moment. So we're looking at an offset press working with the weight overhead. This is putting more stress through one side of the body, and it's not just through the shoulder that there is more stress and more demand, but it is through the entire trunk, hips, and all the way down to the feet. You will feel a difference. So think about in everyday life, we very rarely will pick something up completely symmetrically. So in everyday life, we should also train to pick things up not quite symmetrically. Here's another way that you can go offset, and it's offset with the actual weight itself. You'll notice that the plate is on one side of the bar and the other side is unloaded or less loaded. And there we have to manage not only the weight that is on one side, but we also then have to almost create a little bit of pull through the other side. So this is all about learning how to manage different objects, different intensities, different weights in different positions throughout the body. From there, we're going to take it into a more studio view, looking at a little bit more mobility now by working different positions, different reaches, different drives of the arms. So you saw beginning with a little more anterior drive, opening up the scapula through a push motion. Now looking at a bit more posterior, getting a bit of stretch out the shoulders, utilizing that mass and momentum to help open up the shoulder joint in 3D. We're looking at our laterals, lateral out to the sides, and now lateral overhead. All of these different movements, forwards and backwards, side to side, round and round, all will help to open up and engage the entire shoulder complex, not just the shoulder joint, but the scapula, as well as the core and the hips. So this is a great exercise, a great combination of exercises that you can pick one of, you can pick a couple of, or you can build all the way up to a full sequence in order to prep the body. Another great prep exercise I feel especially for the scapula, for those rotator cuff muscles which are talked about a lot. This is a fantastic banded overhead reach. This is switching on a little bit of that lateral and a little bit of that scapular stability whilst reaching overhead. I find this a really good one before working with heavy weights overhead. Working on technique, working on stacking the shoulders, the elbows, the wrists, the hands, trying to create that stack position. It's all about that shoulder and hand organization, which helps. And then you can add a little bit of load to it if you like. I found that the clients really feel this exercise once you start to add a little bit of load. They'll get massive benefit and a massive amount of intensity by utilizing the band with the dumbbells in combination. So keeping a little bit of stretch through the band all the time, trying to keep that stretch on, trying to keep that organization of the shoulders, elbows, wrists and hands. Now we're taking a look at what impact the feet have and what impact the rest of the body has at shoulder stability. Again, I'm taking it through a little step matrix, so working in some different directions with the steps, working forwards, working backwards, working side to side, working round and round, but again to try and provide a little extra stability from the bottom up. So this is what I would call a bottom up driver. Drive a light or a moderate dumbbell overhead, but then work from the bottom up to create that reaction as far as shoulder stability is concerned. So this is a great stability exercise. And we can start with one dumbbell and then we can take it to do two dumbbells. As you can see here, I'm integrating the movement a little more, integrating the press and the step at the same time. Again, you could just pick one of these drivers, foot drivers, or you can do a combination of foot drivers in order to get the right reaction for your clients. I can tell you from experience that my hardest ones are these side-to-side ones. These side-to-side ones I feel much more as far as shoulder stability. And then with regards to mobility, I actually find that the rotational steps are hard to still drive a full overhead press whilst working through rotation. So again, try them out with your clients. Find which ones your clients are more successful at, less successful at, and then it gives you somewhere to go. It gives you a journey to work with your clients. Either you want to make it easier so you can load up more, or you make it harder and add some challenge. And as you can see here with the steps, we're now taking those steps with a little bit more momentum, combining the forwards and backwards. So not just stepping forwards, but from a forward position to backwards and from a backwards position to forwards. And working with different combinations of steps with the press. So at the moment, working from that opposite side lateral to open lateral with the press, and then going from open lateral with the dumbbells down to opposite lateral with the dumbbells up. Just again, playing with those combinations. Which combination suits me the best? Which combination challenges me more? And then from there, I can then start to tick off and start to build in those challenges and build in those easy ones into the right set of programming. It may be that I go for the mobility challenge at the beginning of my programming phase, and then I move into a phase where I make it easier so that I can go through a little bit heavier loads with the next phase. Now we're looking at a really nice coupling drill. For any of you guys that have worked with a little bit more kind of physiotherapy, you'll understand this term of coupling. Essentially, it's trying to get rotation and lateral flexion in the same movement, and we've got type 1 and type 2 motions going here. All you've got to know is that one motion or one coupling is where we would reach and we would go rotation through one way and also side bend the same way, or we rotate one way and side bend in the opposite direction. These are natural motions which happen every day in everyday life, and we need a decent amount of mobility but also stability to go with it. So you can see me playing around with the combinations of type 1 and type 2 motions, and then you can start to put those combinations together to add a little bit more cognitive drive. And then you can try, if you can, to start building up and maybe see how fast you can go. Because in sport particularly, we need to work at speed with those combinations of movements. And now we take a little change of kit. We're looking at a kettlebell overhead press, and then once in the overhead press position, working on mobility through the rest of the body, rotational and lateral mobility, that type 2 motion through the spine, but also lots of motion through the hips all the way down to the feet, providing that mixture of stability and mobility. And here's one you don't see very often, which is then a reach down in the other direction, a type 1 side bend. So trying to get rotation and side flexion whilst reaching behind the body in a type 1 motion. Obviously, with all of these exercises, start small, start light, gather the movement quality first, and then begin to pick your battles. Pick whether you go for more weight or more reps or more speed, and build it through a number of weeks with your clients. We've changed the kit again, and we've also changed the beginning position. So here we're looking at a half kneeling press. Half kneeling press with the Viper, offsetting the load of the Viper, which will add a little different load through the core, through the hips, whilst in this side kneeling position, which will also add a little different loading and demand through the core and through the hips. We started with just a standard press, and now we're taking a floor to overhead press. So having to put down and pick up the object from floor up to overhead, managing what happens at the hips and the torso in order to pick up, and then stabilizing whilst pressing. And we can do that from both sides from the half kneeling on the left. So I'm staying half kneeling on the left, but trying to pick up and put down now from the other side. I can tell you from this side, there is a greater demand for mobility at that left hip in order to get the body over the top of the body itself, over the top of the leg, in order to pick up and press. You can start lightly with the Viper and then build the Viper, but also you can change the start position. So rather than a kneeling, you can go from a split position. So we're looking at a split press, again with that offset hold of the Viper. We have the ability to play with all sorts of different holds of the Viper. And then we can take it across and we can try the other side. So again, rather than having the weight over my right side with my left foot in front or my right foot in front, I've now got it over the right side with the right foot. So changing the combinations up again, that's the important thing. Seeing what works best, what works least best, and then trying to build a strategy that is better for my clients or better for myself as an athlete, as a recreational athlete. I enjoy running, and I find that this positioning whilst working over the overhead press kind of ticks two boxes. It's a great position to build strength and stability for running, but then incorporating the overhead press, I'm getting a decent amount of upper body pump and work as well. So great if you want to look good and also want to run well as well. We've got loads of hip stability and mobility going on, but we're getting loads of work through the shoulders, as you can see here. Now we've changed a piece of kit again. I really like this exercise with the rip trainer because that rip trainer gives us that offset loading. It forces us to kind of stabilize through rotation, stabilize through lateral flexion, and stabilize all the way up through the hands. And with this particular movement, I'm trying to keep the bar of the rip trainer as horizontal as possible and as equal as possible. So I really have to concentrate through what's going on at both hands. With the first side, when I was facing forwards, gave me a little bit more mobility. The band pulled me back into position, and this side is a bit more stability based, where I'm having to fight to keep the bar close to the body and drive overhead. The bar itself is, because of the band, is trying to be pulled further towards the pivot, so I'm having to work more stability by facing towards. If you don't have a rip trainer at home or in the gym, you can also use a or a resistance band. That resistance band is behind the anchor, and again I'm getting a little bit of assistance with the mobility here whilst driving overhead. And now again, I've got to now get a little bit more stability. I'm having to work for that stability to keep my hands driving straight overhead and not falling forwards with the resistance of the band. So you're getting some overhead work as well as some frontal or some sagittal plane work as well. We can change the kit again. I like using the ball because you get that little squeeze on the ball. By squeezing the ball, you're creating a different connection. From there, we can then start to work on a bit of power. Balls are great to add a little bit of power to, and as you can see here, a little throw and catch, keeping an eye on the ball, that finish position of the hands just to keep safe. And then from there, if I'm then confident and competent at throwing and releasing and letting the ball drop, I can start to add a catch in. For any athletic type exercises, then this is a great drill to work to start trying to catch the ball. Then we can add a target into it as well. The target's pretty low here, as you can see, but we can increase that target up the wall as well. So now we're going to take a little change of orientation and we're going to look at a bit of body weight overhead pressing. So by changing the body position, by changing what would be considered maybe a push-up position, orientating the hips high and dropping the head towards the floor, we can start to look at how we can build that overhead strength, but from a bodyweight position. We've all been in lockdowns recently, so this is a great little variation that we can do anywhere, anytime, and start to work on our overhead press. If we don't quite have the mobility in the legs, or we want to increase the amount of force going down through the body, we can take it to a kneeling position from an elevated level, and then from there keep the elevated level, take it back to the feet, add more leverage through the body, and try and get our overhead press load done. So there's something for everyone to try and work on. It's a more advanced exercise, so maybe get strong with external load before beginning that one. And then we take it onto cables. I love working with cables because it gives us so much variety, so much angulation. Much like when we were working with the resistance bands and the rip trainer, at the moment trying to use the cables to actually help get a little bit mobility and driving the cable overhead. Now working from a side standing position, that cable is not only trying to work against gravity vertically, but it's also trying to pull me toward it. So I'm getting a little bit of different work by being side standing. And again, working on that extra stability now with the single cable overhead, just like when we were working with the rip trainer. And then if we can work one way lateral, we can also work the other way lateral. Again, this one is a bit more of a mobility assister. It's helping me drive that bicep close to the ear overhead by drawing me towards it. And as we finish today, we're now taking a little look at some variations that we can use with the Renegade. I love the Renegade because of the angle it gives us, particularly for everyday life and sport. We often, although we do reach overhead, we reach overhead at so many different angles, so many variations of footprints. I think the Renegade trainer is a really great way, the landmine, whatever you want to call it, is a really great way of incorporating lots of different patterns, and you can really load up with the Renegade and work through some decent loads whilst working with that athletic mobility, stability and coordination. So hopefully today's exercises have really given you some food for thought. Hopefully you've picked up on either a piece of kit or a movement, whether it be a movement at the feet, a movement at the hands, a different driver. Hopefully it's given you something different to work with yourself or with your clients. As always, I would suggest trying these exercises out for yourself first. Get a feel for them. Once you've got a feel for them, then you can begin to work with your clients more successfully. Don't be afraid to open up the box. Don't be afraid to explore any exercise, not just the overhead press, and make those exercises more bespoke, unique and individualized towards your client's needs or towards your class needs as well. Not forgetting that if you run classes, small group training, that you can add variety, spice up those classes by making slight variations to your movement patterning. We hope you enjoyed another exercise explored.